This is TWiT.
This isn't about Section 230. This wasn't about anything but I don't understand why they still, even after the election, want a grandstand.
Fundraising is a 24/7 thing, man.
Oh. Yeah, exactly. Like just because the elections are over doesn't mean they don't want to, keep their job, get somewhere bigger next year or 4 years from now or something like that. Yeah. But this is definitely something that's important for us to be. This discussion does need to be had. I think what I've learned in the past year is that if you think about, maybe a year ago or earlier this year, what these hearings were like, it was really like an eye-rolling peacock fest that just made you want to throw things at your television set or your computer. And they've gotten
Iceland,
better.
As the case.
You want to scream scream to Iceland, yeah. They've gotten better. They're starting to realize that they actually have to ask important questions, and it's not just a place to say, will you promise to do X, Y, and Z because that's my platform. They don't do that as much. They really are coming to the table now with like, okay, here's what our constituents are actually worried about. Here's what we've been researching, and there are people who are kind of behind the scenes telling them things like, this is what's going on, this is what the issue is, this is what we need to work on. And they're starting to bring that to the table now. And I think that we will see some real discussions being had about this sort of thing in the near future, maybe within the next year.
So I guess the question is, and maybe it was Ted Cruz who crystallized this. He asked Jack Dorsey about Twitter's decision to add labels to the president's tweets about voter fraud. Cruz said, "You're a publisher when you're doing that," he barked. "You're entitled to take a policy position, but you don't get to pretend you're not a publisher and therefore get special benefit under Section 230. That doesn't seem unfair. Just for those who are not following this, it's something we've been talking about for months. Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act says, in effect, that just because you're publishing on the internet, a comment section, a chat room, Twitter, Facebook, doesn't mean you're a publisher. And in fact, you're protected if you decide to delete content or not delete content. You can't be sued for what a third party posts on your site. Now, clearly, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter are publishers, too, of content that they create, but that most of the content on those sites are not created by them, so they're not liable for that. That many people consider as a foundational law that made the internet possible. I know I wouldn't be able to have an IRC chat room if I could be sued for what people say in there. I wouldn't have comments on a forum or on a YouTube post if I were be liable for what they say. So that protects me, and it has been a very important thing for the development of the internet. But it is true that if you start acting like a publisher, you shouldn't have a safe harbor, right?
And Leo, there's also something to consider, which is that just like you're saying, you wouldn't have a forum if you weren't protected. But there are lots of people who are harassed and like have all kinds of horrible things said to them, said about them. And these non-publishers like Twitter and Facebook and stuff, they just shrug and say, we didn't do it, so we're not going to really make a big deal about it.
I think they get really nervous about policing it. And this is a problem with 230, and I don't know what the solution is, but they get really nervous about policing it because I think that they are concerned that once they start to police in a detailed way, they are then liable to police everything, which they can't figure out how to do.
230 specifically says, though, you can do that, and it doesn't make you a publisher. You can, and even if you act as a publisher in some aspects, that doesn't mean you're suddenly liable for content that third parties put on your site. I have a blog. I'm liable for the blog content, but I'm not liable under Section 230 for the comments on that blog. That's one thing Ted Cruz is a little confused about. And there's very specifically a safe harbor so that this is the other thing that these guys, I think, don't understand. If you eliminate 230, that eliminates moderation because it's 230 that's protecting you when you moderate. Yes? You don't, Lindsay, you think that any moderation?
I'm trying to go back to my very, very early days on the internet, and I'm talking about like the year 2000, and how much time we spent kind of worrying about the degree to which we, meaning publishers, got involved at all. Because the concern was if you start to get involved, then you are acting as a publisher. And deleting is one thing. And I think that we have evolved, the internet has evolved, and all of the understanding of laws, and this one in particular has evolved to allow us to do more deleting to protect people. But there is still, but it could be argued, the opposite could be argued, which is that once you start to make decisions and really detailed decisions about what is fair game, you're then responsible for all decisions, and you're acting as a publisher because you are editing. Yeah. And so I think that the social media sites have had to try to navigate this, and they do it wrong a lot. But I think that 230 itself probably needs to evolve to give more flexibility to allow that safe harbor without publishers having to worry about going a step too far and then becoming responsible for what people are saying on that platform. It's just a tough question, because it's true. I think it's fair to say that Twitter is in many ways playing a communications role that's more similar to the phone company than
a common carrier
newspaper.
Instead of a publisher.
But it is not the same as a phone company, because the record is permanent and it's not one-to-one. So it is a difficult one.
Yeah. To get into more of the internet old school thing, I actually remember in 1995, people were debating whether or not ISPs were considered publishers because they would allow people to put up bonkers websites. Actually, in 1995, I did a news story on Stormfront, because they had rolled out their website and they had forums and were beginning to recruit. And the question was, the ISP that lets Stormfront run its operation, are they responsible as a publisher? And ultimately, they concluded no. The whole point to a common carrier is it provides a service to anyone who can pay the fee. And there are terms and conditions for the service, but you can't just go in willy-nilly. It has to be something that's provably detrimental to the service.
Well, that's
what
interesting.
What I wonder is if social media is going to get to the point where they're going to argue that they're more like an ISP in that they're equal. They offer equal access, and as such, it's just whoever can pay to play gets to.
Yeah.
It's because it seems these are all companies that are, fundamentally selling data. What they generate on the end, the harassment campaigns or the incorrect tweets or the Facebook groups that are used to organize, like that's the user experience. But from a business model, every single one of these companies is in the business of harvesting data and then selling sliced and diced data products to somebody else.
So
they're going to do whatever
there are two things here. There's the law, which is very clear. In fact, that one of the things I'm so hesitant to modify 230 because it is so almost perfect in its very simplistic, clear description. It's almost like a constitutional amendment. It's very simple. There's also, though, public pressure. If you are publishing Stormfront, you may not be violating the law, but you may also be subject to intense public pressure, and this is not to obviate the need for a society to in other ways say, hey, we don't like that, you shouldn't do it. But what they're saying is government should not get involved in this. It's important to remember that the reason 230 exists was a lawsuit against Prodigy. That's how long ago this was. Prodigy, in an effort to provide, and I'm reading from Mike Masnick's excellent post on techdirt.com. In order to provide a family-friendly environment, Prodigy did some moderation of its message boards. And in the lawsuit Stratton Oakmont versus Prodigy, the judge ruled that since Prodigy did moderate the boards, it would be liable for anything it left up. At the time, the state of the law was such that that was the case. So Section 230 was written to explicitly overrule that judicial decision so that sites like Prodigy would not have liability if they moderated. It would give them the right to moderate without suddenly becoming a publisher. It's really, really important. Without that, I don't know if you have the internet. There are a lot of lawsuits that were just preemptively stopped because Section 230. Nope, you cannot sue Twitter for something Lisa's husband posts on there. Right? Mark Zuckerberg can't come after Twitter for that. And that's right. That's the way it should be.
Yeah.
He does look like data. There's nothing Mark Zuckerberg can do about it. So I think we got to be careful about modifying it. I really makes me nervous because it is pretty close to, I feel pretty close to perfect. But I'm just arguing against you a little bit, Lindsay, on that.
Oh, that's totally fair. I'm not even sure you're arguing against me. I'm kind of exploring in my own mind how do we fix the problem, which is rampant spread of misinformation and sometimes intentionally.
Exactly.
And we're not there yet. I think that business interests are, in this case, counter to public interests. Yes. And I just hope that conversation keeps going.
Yeah. Well, there's no question
you said
in my
what
mind.
I was kind of groping at, which is that there's no incentive for businesses to address this unless they're going to lose money. And to loop back to earlier comments, once Facebook loses brand equity, they're going to get very, very interested in addressing the public good.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's no question in my mind that these guys have immense power. I don't know what the answer is. I don't know if they should be regulated or broken up, or I don't think those are good solutions either. That's to me, this is the biggest problem. And I'm gonna include Google in this, Facebook, Amazon. I'm gonna throw in here. They have, Twitter less so, to be honest. It's only a few 100 million people. It's not that big a deal. And YouTube, these guys have immense power. And I think you could make the case that if Mark Zuckerberg decided he wanted candidate A to be the next president, he'd have a lot of ability to sway the country. Don't you think? Mm-hmm. He could do it. Mm-hmm. Do we want some one person to have that ability? And yet, what is the governmental remedy for that? I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is a tough one. It's just, it's really hard stuff, and we haven't quite figured it out yet.
And that's why I scream in Iceland.